Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. Let me say right off the bat, we had technical difficulties with our broadcast last week. That is to say, the program that was taped on the 7th of January, I believe, somehow got lost in the computer. I believe if you go to my website, tarpley.net, by about middle week, that is to say, by about, the 17th or so of January, but maybe even earlier, you can hear the missing program. If you want to keep up the continuity here, which I urge people to do, I will try today to touch on some of the main points that we had last week, because some of these are just indispensable. But please do take the opportunity to go to tarpley.net. If you haven't gone there lately, go. And you can pick up that program there on the broadcast page, on the World Crisis Radio page. And while you're there, make sure you buy some copies of my distinguished books, Obama, the Postmodern Coup, The Making of a Manchurian Candidate, Barack H. Obama, The Unauthorized Biography, 9/11 Synthetic Terror Made in USA, Surviving the Cataclysm, Your Guide to the Worst Financial Crisis in Human History, and other books that you can see there, also in different languages for our overseas listeners. So we now need to catch up. Let us look at the situation here. Obviously, much in this past week, and we're recording here on the 14th of January. It's Friday, the 14th of January. We're looking back now at this Tucson shooting, right? The wounding of Congresswoman Giffords, the slaying of a federal judge, and of others there in Tucson. Let's take a couple of steps back before we dive into this. The pattern that we're dealing with is much broader. And remember, in situations like this, the details of each individual instance are far less important than the existence of the pattern, because every individual detail in every individual instance is subject to falsification or distortion or invention or omission, whatever it is. But the pattern has objective validity. It's real, and it's incontrovertible once you can see a pattern of similar events. And I believe that this is what we have here. A couple of premises. There is an invisible government. Yes, indeed. Invisible government, parallel government, secret government, rogue network, deep state, deep politics, many names for it. It is, of course, the tentacles of Wall Street, to some degree of the City of London, but going through Wall Street into the U.S. federal government. It goes back more than 120 years at this point, or thereabouts, 115. 1895, Grover Cleveland, Democratic president, capitulates to J.P. Morgan and Wall Street and the British, and Wall Street takes over the U.S. public debt. Remember, the birth of the Federal Reserve 20 years later merely codifies and solidifies what had been determined as power relations all the way back in 1895. So there is an invisible government. Now, the invisible government is located above and behind the visible institutions. And you will see, of course, people in the visible government who are apparently elected officials or appointed officials. The trick, though, is that their loyalty is not to the Constitution or any governing process, but rather to the private Wall Street banker-dominated network that they represent. And this is the fatuousness of the whole anti-government rhetoric is clear if it neglects this key point, that government is bad when it is bad, and it's often bad, because of the Wall Street influence. It's Wall Street that owns and runs Washington and perverts it, not so much the other way around, although that also happens at different times in the process. But the fundamental reality is Wall Street owns Washington, 1895 to the present. Few exceptions, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Kennedy, to some extent an exception, and we can go through the details on that another time. But let's now get back to the present. There is an invisible government. Now, we have this new situation in Washington with these Republicans coming in. There are about 100 new members of Congress. Now, this is an objective social potential for people, naive, provincial neophytes, amateurs coming into Washington and thinking that the visible institutions of government are actually the ones that govern, whereas, of course, the reality is that they generally don't. So you have about 100 people who need to be taught a lesson. These are mostly reactionary Republicans. A lot of them are Tea Party fanatics. A lot of them have a very pronounced ideological agenda. So from the point of view, and of course, I disagree with these Tea Party fanatics on just about everything, and I don't like reactionary Republicans, and that ought to be clear. Nor do I like Wall Street Democrats. You have some of those, too. You got 10 of them, small group. Smallest since 1915, as we're constantly told, right? Smallest freshman class of any party since right before World War I. This group now of about 100 to 110 newbies on Capitol Hill must be disciplined. They have got to be chilled, and above all, their leaders have got to be chilled from the point of view now of the invisible government. They've got to be taught a lesson. And what we've seen now in the first 2 weeks of the new year has been a series of events. Now, the Tucson one is the most heavily publicized, but there are others that have spoken extremely eloquently to all kinds of people in the executive branch, the White House, the legislative branch, the House of Representatives in particular, as well as in the states. And we should look at this too. By my count, it's almost half a dozen of these incidents, right? Call it 5 or 6, depending on how you want to count them. And the goal of all of these things is to establish somehow the limits within which they're allowed to operate, to intimidate them, right? To terrorize them. The purpose of terrorism is terror, and there's terrorism going on, clear enough. The goal of this is to discipline, to chasten and suppress the extreme right-wing Republicans, and there are a lot, and people in the left wing of the Democrats, and there are a few who are interested in doing something, for example, to stop fraud closures, doing something to attack Wall Street. They are being told, you back off, that there will be now there will be a period of centrism presided over by Obama, and this will be done under the banners of centrism, bipartisanship, no labels, civility, and the goal of this is to visit genocidal austerity on the American people. Isn't that funny? The centrists, the moderates, the no-labels crowd, the petty bourgeois good government group, what's their program? Well, it's going to be, as you will see, because it's validated by the smiling face of Barkey, will be to cut and gut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And the idea now is everything that has been done sets the stage for the Obama State of the Union. And the Obama State of the Union, the only question going on behind the scenes in Washington is, which way is he going to do it? Is he going to launch the attack on Social Security first, or will he do a tax reform which will set the stage for a later attack on Social Security? And the tax reform, of course, will be yet another windfall bonanza for parasitic, derivatives-based financier interests centered in Wall Street. That's where we are now. So we'll be back in just a second. We can go through the various incidents and illustrate the way in which these incidents are being used to channel everything down the center, as long as you mean by that genocidal austerity against the American people, with the Malthusians on the left and the Austrians on the right agreeing.